Well, the time is just gone, 9 minutes past 8, as we kick off this morning, talking with Defend Our Democracy, a statement that they had issued on the Global Assembly of the World Movement for Democracy. And we're talking with the Deputy Chairperson, Dr. Rekgotsofetse Chikane, providing an insight into this statement that has been issued. Dr. Rekgotsofetse Chikane, good morning to you, sir, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Yes, wonderfully able to join us. I'm hoping I've got your name correct.
Yeah, no, you do. You do. You're nailing it.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Absolutely. Okay, let's just talk about the statement that has been issued. And it's very, very interesting because, you know, when we're talking about the world movement for democracy, and democracy seems to be the buzzword right across the entire world. And let's just, I'm trying to understand some of the background to the statement and why the statement was issued.
Yeah, no, so thanks again. So the statement was issued because from last year, June, ourselves, a few other South African organizations, were approached for the idea of hosting the World Movement for Democracy's 12th Global Assembly. It would have been the second assembly that's happened in South Africa, with the first one happening back in 2004, celebrating 10 years of South Africa's democracy. And the underlying idea behind it was, and I would say not that democracy is a buzzword, it's the idea that there are multiple countries across the world, activists sitting in horrific situations where democracy is not present, where freedoms are not present. And the idea that South Africa, that came out of its apartheid history, that came out of its struggle, was able to formulate our democracy with all the challenges that it's had, that it symbolizes some form of hope for many different organizations and activists across the globe. And the idea was to bring them all to South Africa. We're talking about 600 different people, over 300 organizations across 97 different countries, to essentially say, how can we create global solidarity around the idea of democracy? And not one idea of democracy, but the idea that there's a need to collaborate around fighting against oppressive forces across the world. The statement came out because of concerns about DOD and other affiliates, as well as organizations associated with the conference, as associating with US imperialism. And we hear all those concerns and the idea that maybe this conference might not highlight the Palestinian issue in any particular way. And we thought it was very, very important to say that the Palestinian issue will be on the agenda, regardless of who's hosting a conference, that we'll talk about Palestinian prisoners in particular, but we'll also be talking about other struggles that people are having across Sudan, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, etc., about all the challenges that we face and how do we come together to face against them, essentially, for lack of a better term.
Yes, thank you for that, Dr. Chikane. And the mere fact that, democracy seems to be the buzzword right across the entire world, and particularly when one looks at many countries around the world, when one looks at even the powers that be, the superpowers like the United States of America, always seem to be harping on democracy and how democratic countries are, because we know right across the entire world there are a number of issues. But is there such a thing as true democracy? And I think, again, coming from South Africa, our experience since 1994, since we became a democracy, we've got a constitution that is unparalleled, one of the best constitutions in the world as well. And all of this, at the end of the day, to stamp out any doubts, any misunderstandings or misconceptions with regard to democracy. And I'm sure has looked at these issues in depth, and I will come, in fact, shortly, Dr. Chikane, to the Palestinian question.
Yeah, so I would say, and I apologize if there's background noise on my side. So I would say that there is no one conception of democracy. And even though I would want South Africa to export its democracy to as many countries as possible, I would also caution them and say, even with our constitution as it is, we create inherent challenges in our democratic framework And regardless of the constitution that we have, we still have systemic unemployment, poverty, inequality, gender-based violence, and corruption that runs rampant in our country. So our democracy is not perfect, but it's a really great basis to start talking about what we can start doing. I don't believe in the idea that we should look towards the West for the idea of a sense of how we create human dignity through democracy. I want to talk to individuals across the world who are in oppressive situations, who are in autocratic regimes, about what their idea of democracy is for themselves, how we can help them, how we can assist. And I think this conference provides that avenue for it. And I hope it provides that avenue forward when we engage with other activists across the world.
Dr. Chikane, if we had to list some of the more serious concerns with regards to democracy, and you touched on some of the issues like poverty, unequal society, about gender-based violence and the like. What are some of the key issues? And looking at it from a governance perspective, rather than what people are obviously experiencing on the ground, with this whole notion of living in a democratic country or in a democratic society?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I fully understand the question, but from a governance perspective, I think some of the questions that people will be dealing with is this idea of, I love using this example that South Africa is one of the few countries on our continent where we can call our president a cupcake and nothing can happen to us, right? So this idea of how governance is underpinned by certain principles, whether it is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, human dignity. And I think those are the principles that underpin any sort of governance system. If a governance system is not underpinned by those, then that governance system then quickly becomes quite autocratic. And I'm not sure if I fully answered the question, but I think those are the discussions that will be happening in the room. There are multiple different workshops. So it's also, I must clarify, it's not the type of conference where people just lecture at you for 3 days. It's the type of conference where we're actively engaging with workshops where activists can engage with each other around different themes.
Yes, just to add to the question, perhaps to provide just a bit more clarity, Dr. Chikane, is when one looks at democracies right across the entire world, and when we're talking about from a governance perspective, we have countries that boast to be the largest democracies in the world, the greatest democracies in the world. You look at a country like the United States of America, you even look at a country like India, which says it is the largest democracy. But what happens from within? And when I look at it from a governance perspective, what doesn't obviously make sense is the actions reflect a completely opposite view of democracy. And this is by leaders, by politicians, by governments who are not democratic or at the same time who boast to be the greatest or the largest democracies around the world.
Yeah. So we can check, and I wish we had more time to talk about this. So first point of call is that our multilateral systems are failing in multiple different ways because the superpowers of the world essentially squabble amongst each other about who gets to be considered as human and who has dignity in our planet, right? And that it makes our multilateral systems quite mute, but there's still a need for countries who believe in them to utilize them. For the big countries, we're seeing that two challenges. One, the rise of far-right leaders in democratic nations who are taking advantage of the 2008 financial crisis. They're taking advantage of capitalism and late-stage capitalism, and they're taking advantage of inequality widespread in their own countries and utilizing that to put in the elites of the world to essentially say, how can we extract as much from our economies as possible? And the problem that we have is that it is coming out of the will of the people, that you have democratic processes that allow leaders who should never be in charge of anything, it allows them to come into play and allows them to take advantage of the situation. Now, the question then becomes, and again, I'm not a fan of looking towards the West for inspiration about democracy. It's about the idea about all the activists who are coming to our particular assembly, if I just put it back to that, about how we are going to collaborate about the idea of what democracy means for us, allowing people about the global South to talk about democracy in the global South. Now, what platform that happens on is deeply important, and I'm sure we'll get onto that. right? But it doesn't detract from the idea of most of us are not concerned about the quality of government in the United States. The United States will be the United States, and the UK will be the UK. They'll make their crazy decisions out of their own particular national interest. But for us, it's about how do the global oppressed, in a similar way to the Bandung Conference in 1955, how do the global oppressed come together to essentially say, how do we chart our own path? And I think looking towards the West for the idea of democracy you won't find much there, but you'll find a lot from the inspiration of local activists across the world.
Yes, Dr. Rekgotsofetse, Chikane, we're going to go for a quick ad break. We're going to put you on hold, sir. We'll be back in a minute.
Boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
After the recent attacks on Gaza, many families have been displaced with their homes left destroyed. Through your donations, our teams are on the ground in Gaza, providing support and delivering necessary aid to families affected. The people of Gaza need your help. Give hope. Donate today to Penny Appeal South Africa. www.pennyappeal.org.za 031 1100 573.
We are here on the ground with Penny Appeal organizations in Gaza.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
Amman means safety.
The Amman School of Excellence in Finetown, South Africa, is securing the futures of underprivileged children by providing world-class education in a safe and nurturing environment. Sponsor a child for only 15,000 Rand per year or any amount. A quality education at Amman presents a pathway out of poverty and a brighter future for South Africa.
Africa Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Well, the time is just gone 8:23 a.m. as we continue this morning with my guest, Dr. Rekgotsofetse Chikane, Defend Our Democracy, and he is the Deputy Chairperson, providing us an insight into a statement that was made by the Global Assembly of the World Movement for Democracy. Dr. Chikane, just to continue with the discussion, and interesting, just before we went for the air break, you spoke about the Global South. Now, it is clear that there is this great divide at this point in time. And let's just look at it purely from a democracy perspective, the Global South versus the Global North, because we know right throughout the entire world, and I hear what you say when you say that we don't look to the West when we look at democracies, because we know what is taking place right across the United States. You're looking at Europe as well. We've seen
I'm not sure
more.
if you can hear me.
I can hear you. I can hear you, Dr. Chikane. I'm just saying, looking at drawing the difference between the global south and the global north in terms of how democracy is seen between the two. I think we seem to be having a problem, Dr. Rekgotsofetse, so we're going to try and see if we can get him on a better line, because this is quite an interesting dynamic that is actually playing out when we're talking about democracy right across the entire world. And when one looks at governments right across the world, particularly in the global north, and we see the leaning of governments more towards the right. We've seen a lot of right-wing conservative governments springing up in many countries around the entire world. We've seen it in the United States now with the Republicans, Donald Trump as well. We've seen it in places like France, in Holland, many countries right across the entire world. And the question again is there a thing called a true democracy while the United States of America, while it preaches democracy to the rest of the world, while it preached democracy even to the Middle East and to the Arab world as well, and to the global south, because the global south seems to be under the radar, it seems to be under the spotlight. Dr. Rekgotsofetse, I see you back, sir. The question I had raised is in terms of defining...
I had to use my phone.
In terms of defining democracy in how the global south looks at it versus the global north. And we know the global south more aligned at this point in time to the likes of the Soviet Union. We know with the BRICS, we know with countries like China as well. So let's just talk about the global south versus the global north and this whole notion of democracy between the two.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that I don't think the global south is completely in unison around which superpowers they support and which ones they don't. Right? We do live in a world now that is not the kind of 1970s, 1980s Cold War dynamic. We live in a world now that's quite multipolar, that has different forces that are pulling in multiple different directions. BRICS itself has its own internal challenges with the shift for South Africa, Brazil, and India in particular to create stronger economic ties away from China and Russia, yet also forming BRICS with new organizations. I know Argentina left, but expanding BRICS. So I don't know if the Global South is in complete unison around this, but I think what the Global South does need to do, and their conception of it, is that the idea of democracy in the Global South is informed by aspects such as imperialism, colonialism, and the lack of the ability to self-determine. And I think that becomes the strand of logic for countries to be able to self-determine and not have their self-determination essentially influenced by any other country. And I think we're seeing that happening. We're looking at that, I mean, for all the faults of the UN, when you look at the voting patterns of the Global South, it is all over the place except on issues of oppression. And on issues of oppression, we see the Global South is able to find solidarity, to find common place. But when it comes to economic factors, short-term goals, we seem to have our attention divided. But that just creates an opportunity for the Global South to have to really come together and say, what is our place? How can we not differ around short-term goals if we have a clear understanding of what our long-term goals are? Obviously, the Global South is huge, so I can't speak on behalf of the entire Global South, but I think there's a necessity for us to start engaging, to start debating, to make sure that we're not making assumptions about our belief systems. And where we differ, we then engage and have critical debates and try and find persuasion rather than bullying people.
Dr. Chikane, let's just get to the issue surrounding the Global Assembly, drawing attention to the genocide and the atrocities that are taking place in Palestine, in Lebanon, and also in the wider Middle East. And not only Palestine, we're talking closer to home, we're talking the African continent, we're talking about DRC, we are talking about Sudan, and these are all disasters in the making. and just looking at it from the Global Assembly in terms of how these disasters, how these genocides, how the pain, how the suffering of the people of Palestine, Sudan, and also many other countries right across the entire world are actually seen in this Global Assembly.
Yeah, so I must say that one conference won't solve the world's issues in any particular way. But one conference is deeply important still in the idea of giving voice to people who do not have voices. Voice to people who, when even they do have a voice, are systemically ignored by superpowers across the world. And I think for this Global Assembly, we made a particular effort that on day one, that we have Palestinian representatives and individuals from Palestine in particular, or who have associations with Palestine because they can't be in Gaza or the West Bank at this present moment in time. We are giving them an opportunity to tell us their stories alongside activists from Myanmar or Myanmar, who are also going through their own genocide, right? So we've put aside a particular moment in the program just for that, to my best understanding. We're also going to be providing awards. Now, awards aren't something that changes people's lives in any particular way, but we do hope that it gives out a level of hope to different individuals. But as I said, the conference is not a talk shop. I don't particularly like participating in talk shop conferences, but it is filled with workshops for activists to talk about issues such as how to take advantage of the information age, how to innovate strategies of democratic practice, how to innovate strategies of protest. Our one particular session as DOD, we're working quite closely with an organization from Chile about how to expose corruption in government. As you know, DOD for a very long time has been a thorn in government side because we've been highlighting state capture for the last 4 years and highlighting the perpetrators of it. So we're dealing with issues of organizations that are advocating for real democratic rights, all the way to real localized issues such as corruption in their countries and in their own communities. And for this conference, we're going to highlight, as I said, the Palestinian issue in multiple different ways, but not just through the idea of here's a microphone, speak. We also want to give them the opportunity to engage with other activists, to engage with local democracy workers. And through workshops, one particular workshop on political prisoners across the world, we've made sure that the issue of Palestinian political prisoners is not just spoken about, but is workshopped about how do we navigate, how do we essentially mobilize around this issue amongst multiple different Democrats or democratic activists across the world.
Yes. Now, Dr. Chikane, I've noticed that this statement has been signed by a number of organizations. So there is clearly a great deal of support for this initiative in terms of the Global Conference for Democracy. Just how does one actually expand this and actually, take advantage, particularly in the light of what has taken place in Palestine in the last year? We've seen right across the entire world. We've seen activists, we've seen civil society groups, come out in their numbers, protest, express their concerns, and basically what this has actually done is it's created some sort of unity with activists and civil society groups right across the entire world. How does one actually leverage or take advantage of the situation to make this a truly global movement to defend democracy?
Yeah, so I would like to kind of tackle that at multiple levels. And the first one is the one thing that DOD really prides itself on, and it's the work that we want to do going forward, is about how do you create not just at an international level, but at a local level, a consolidated front of civil society in particular. And one of the things is about making sure that we hear all the concerns. So there've been various different concerns around our participation in the conference from really important voices across the country. And for us, it's about first port of call, we can't create global solidarity if we can't create solidarity at home. But we won't always agree around the strategies and tactics that we take when we fight global issues in any particular way, but we do need to find commonplace about the principled positions, right? So the principled positions that there is a genocide and ethnic cleansing happening in Palestine. And once we can agree on that, we can then start thinking about solidarity. And why I mention that at a local level is that the exact same thing happens at an international level. That people will always disagree across the different strategies we might take, the different approaches. Some people might say that you have to go protest. Some people say you have to boycott. Some people might say that it is easier just to put our head in the ground and hope that someone else changes. And we say that so long that we need to mobilize, so long as we can mobilize on the principle of change, right, the strategy and tactics can come. Right? And global solidarity needs us to all be on the same footing about what the issue is at hand. And we really, in my mind, that becomes the most powerful issue. The Palestinian genocide galvanized the world to essentially say genocide is a red line. There's no debate about it. There is no other side of the story. And I think that messaging allowed the world to really come together. We didn't get everyone. There's still some people who are ambivalent. There's still some people who are undecided. And it's the responsibility of us to educate, to do the political discussions, to do the political education of every single person who might be sitting on the fence. There'll be others on the other side who will never change their opinion, and that's okay. The history books will judge them in a very harsh way, I hope, in the future. But in the meantime, in the current, for building global solidarity, it's about how do you not make enemies of allies? If you disagree about strategies and tactics, but how do we persuade each other about the different methods that we'll take? And I think that's how we build global solidarity. I mean, I stood in London in the Palestinian protests and I was amazed. I couldn't fathom the idea of being surrounded by almost 1 million people. I've never experienced that feeling of solidarity like that before. And I wish we could do that in our country. I think we're on the right track. We're just hitting a few speed bumps.
Well, certainly, but also I think just finally, when one looks at what the Palestinian question has actually done, and this was mentioned very, very early into this genocide, is this will define what a new world may look like. It may define what a new world order may look like as well. And I'm sure with initiatives like these, it will go a long way on defining what a new world order should look like, one that is fair, one that is just, and one that actually speaks truth to power, and more importantly, live democracy in the true sense of the word.
Yeah. I mean, I know I said at the beginning we shouldn't look at the United States for any sort of guidelines, but let's just look at the last elections, right? There's multiple reasons why the Democrats lost. I'm not a fan of either party. But what's coming out of the elections is that people said, we didn't vote for the Democrats, the ones who are supposed to be progressive, the ones who are not supposed to be like Trump, because you sided with genocide. You have an entire generation of young Americans in particular who are saying we'll abdicate out of the political system because genocide is a red line. We don't care who comes into power because both of you are genocidal in one way or another. So the question then becomes, what's the influence of that generation on the United States going forward, and the influence the United States has on issues such as genocide going forward? Now, money rules everything in this world, and there's some very rich people who don't want the status quo to change. But I use that as an example of the types of younger activists, younger minds, more critical, more engaging. I know we live in an age of misinformation and disinformation, right? But we also live in an age in which young people are not just interconnected, they're not just consuming social media, but they're critically engaging about finding media, finding news that they believe in. And in my mind, in 30 years from now, that changes the game for us, right? We've already gone into a multipolar world. The question then becomes, how does our generation, who are changing the status quo, who are pushing back against narratives, who are pushing back about just accept the way things are, I hope that changes with us. I hope over the next 30 years that genocide will no longer be something that is debated upon. Now, it is slow and it will not be given to us. So if anyone wants to change the world in any particular way, we need to come together and fight it together. The first port of call is, come to our assembly if you can, if you've registered already. And if not, then find other spaces, whether local or international or local, if we had to be very academic about it. I think our world is moving in a positive direction, but we need to go through the dark times before we get there. And I am hopeful that there's a generation that will alter the way that we look at things going forward, so long as we engage and debate and persuade and don't fall into the rhetoric of fighting with each other on social media or bullying people into a position. That's not what I want our generation to be known for, because it's not the type of tactics that change the world.
Well, I must say very, very profound indeed in terms of your final comments as well, Dr. Chikane. But once again, we do appreciate you taking time out this morning and talking to us. I wish we could have engaged a lot more, but unfortunately...
Invite me back. I'll come anytime you want.
No, definitely. In fact, I will hold you to a more detailed discussion, hopefully, where we have these panel discussions. And I think this would be the ideal platform, because I think there's just so much that one can actually learn and can unpack from what we've been discussing in the last half an hour or so. But for now, we thank you, sir. We wish you all the best and take care.
Thank you so much. You stay safe now.
Dr. Rekgotsofetse Chikane, Deputy Chairperson of Defend Our Democracy, was us this morning. We come back. We will be taking a look at Somaliland, the long-awaited election results.
We are here in the middle of a Zahra neighborhood. The whole neighborhood is already destroyed. More than 17 towers are down. Here, as you can see, the firefighters trying their best to help. The people are still under the rubble. A lot of the people...
Join Hamza on his exclusive South African tour as he shares his personal experiences, never before seen footage, and powerful insights on the ongoing genocide in Gaza. This is more than just a talk. It's an invitation to witness Gaza through the lens of Hamza Sha'alan. Don't miss this opportunity to meet the photojournalist who brought Gaza's pain and perseverance to the world in its darkest moments. Follow Salam Media on social media pages for more on this tour and be part of the conversation.